Police brutality is getting out of hand. It is rooted in the flawed system that perpetuates racism and violence, that fails to protect and serve justice to the ones who need it the most. We're talking about Black people, we're talking about Hispanic and Asian, we're talking about George Floyd, Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, and the countless deaths of Black people that died in the hands of police department. That's why we want police defunding. That is to eliminate our reliance on policing to secure our own public safety as opposed to propose for an institutional reform. 5 points of mechanism. Firstly, we will have state budget reduction from the police department and allocate them to healthcare, education, rehabilitation, and therapy centers, and that we want to make them free. Secondly, we will have a collective security system. That means that we have to have a community-led policing that involves systems that monitor impacts on community perception. We will routinely report on the results back to the public and create a feedback loop to inform necessary changes in strategy or tactics or in the management of the agency to protect the community. Thirdly, there will be civil litigation procedures as usual, and the crimes will be solved by the head of district. Fourth, when there are heavy crimes such as drug dealing or murder, citizens can still sue perpetrators to get retribution and closure. Fifth, we will invest in small businesses around Bronx, Ghetto, and neighborhoods or other areas that needs helps the most. The things I'm going to talk about today. Firstly, on how the police department have been marginalizing the suffering of Black people and other communities, but secondly, on how police defunding is the most effective way in helping marginalized communities. Before that, 2 points of rebuttals. Firstly, they say to you it's not justified to punish good police force because of the bad ones. We don't think that's true, because the moment that the good police force don't report on the bad ones because of the brutality, racism, sexism, and violence that's been going on to the people of color, they are complicit to the harms and that the cops did. But why don't they want to report, right? Because police force go in squads on mission. You have each other's back during these kind of missions. If you report them, you'll be seen as disloyal or betrayed the team. If they hate you for doing so, they won't care about your life. When you are in the middle of dangerous mission, for example, you're fighting with a drug cartel and there's gun shootings and whatnot, the moment that they know that you report on them, they will not try to protect you or cover you the moment you have to escape that location, for example. This is a structural system makes it impossible for cops to defend themselves. When they're training that tells you that their lives always at stake and you have to look for your colleague life as well. You will be alienated if you're disloyal and you don't want to die. That's why police tends to turn off their body cams and erase footage to protect each other to prevent this kind of thing happening. But even if we have independent counsel, people will still report and investigate, right? They say. Sure, it might happen, but proposition still neglects the true interest and the agenda that people of color want. That is education, welfare, and money. Even when one specific police or some police is punished because of what they did, the Black lives will still suffer. Second rebuttal, they say to you institutional reforms will be effective in protecting marginalized communities. We don't think that's true, because the root of the problem is an internalized racism. Even if you're not born with it, the fact that you live 20 years or more of your life justifying racism and violence towards people of color will be very hard to change, because that means that you have to need few years of reformation, and we don't have that much time for our people's safety. But secondly, police department originates and inherently biased towards racism and violence. In the US, police were used as slave patrols. This is why Black people harmlessly driving or taking a jog can be considered as something suspicious in their department. But even if the institutional reforms will ease the violence and racism towards people of color, that's only bare minimum, because to be anti-racist and to be anti-violence is something that is normal in status quo, because what we want is a safer community, not just being anti-racist and anti-violence. Moving on to my substantive cases. Firstly, the principal ground on why it's justified to defund. 3 reasons why. Firstly, on historical violence and racism, the USA created a system of police department to keep white people safe and to control slavery that's being done to Black people decades ago. The trauma lasts to generations. How they have economic and education limitations now is because of their grandparents who were living in poverty and constantly marginalized and tortured. That's why it's very hard for them to get education back then. But secondly, on how the amount of Black deaths is crazy. From lynching, shootings to Breonna Taylor's, for example, recently a Black father got shot 7 times in his back harmlessly. Thirdly, on how there's murders to different kinds of Black people and different treatment to mental Black people with mental illnesses. But thirdly, the police department have failed to give protection and support to these marginalized community. This marginalized community don't have enough money. And that's why there are a lot of people resort to criminals like robbery and whatnot. As opposed to helping them to create job market, police department is only catching them and taking away their lives from their families, for example, taking away their source of income. This is very problematic because now, as opposed to being safe with the existence of police department, now these people are constantly threatened because they know someday that the police will take them away from their family and take the ways of their getting money. That's why we think that it is very much justified to defund the police department, knowing the discrimination suffering that the department brings and puts the marginalized community. Second argument, how police defunding is the most effective way in helping marginalized communities. We say that we want a world where there's a low criminal rates too, right? Well, people are not afraid to walk alone, people being pulled up in the highway for no reason. We don't want that anymore. But the reason why crime roots from robbery and take someone's assets or whatnot is because they don't have enough money and they're very resentful to authority figures that are the ones who don't care about them and they don't get benefits from the law. They don't get enough money because they have little job vacancies. It's very hard for them to look for a job. The jobs that's available is being drug dealers, for example, or blue-collar workers that don't allow them to get enough money to pay for the bills and food. But in the other hand, these people are naturally disincentivized to hurt when they have enough money. Because the biggest incentive will be getting welfare benefits the moment that you have enough money. You won't have any incentive to kill people or to take away their wallet or to rob from them. That's why our proposal is to defund and allocate the fundings to support our citizens, because it will create several benefits. First, because drug dealers and gangs are the ones who desperately need money and can't get a blue-collar job because of education background and a little job vacancy, our proposal in trying to use the allocation budget to invest on small businesses will help them resort to dealing with collar jobs that is secure and won't risk their lives. For example, when you go in a coffee shop, you will not be killed because of another drug cartel, right? And if the proposition's biggest case and concern is because of drug cartels, then we can use the existing and lasting funds from the defunding for drug and war. But secondly, it is the perfect momentum to get help from political support, especially from Democrats, because firstly, protecting this enfranchised community has been the main agenda of Democrats from the beginning. We think that they'll listen to us knowing we are the biggest supporter base that they need to appeal in order to get votes and to seem consistent with their value. But secondly, defunding the police is a populist agenda because the discourse regarding the exaggeration of police fund is highly concentrated after the narrative that police should be abolished and the defunding of the police. There's a simple and understandable infographics all over Instagram that shows that funds given to the police department is bigger than education, healthcare, and welfare benefits combined. So that's not only Black people that supports this agenda, but their allies, including progressive white people that's a part of Democratic voters base. So based on those two reasons, firstly, on how police have been disenfranchising Black communities and not giving any safety net or any protection to these communities, and secondly, on how it's a perfect momentum to get help from politicians when in these election days. That's why we beg to oppose.